What do you mean by pure belief? I guess just like actual belief in God or
pure belief is, I mean, unadulterated belief is what I mean by pure belief, which is belief that is not like situational. Like, obviously they can go up in, some cases in Catholic and other churches they do, and they say, oh, well, I'm forgiven. I ask God to forgive me. And I think that 99% of the time, actually 100% of the time, that's just a cover up to keep acting within the institution. But, that's obviously exists. You have it in politics. You have it with Dennis Hastert. You even have it within the satanic community. You had Colonel Michael Aquino. I don't know if you know anything about Michael Aquino, but Colonel Michael Aquino, a very prominent Satanist who married, I think he founded the Temple of Set, and he married, who's the famous Satanist? You're probably going to know his name. Like the old-timey one. Not Lucian Graves.
And Anton
LaVey. Yeah. He married Anton LaVey's daughter. He's very heavily involved in the satanic community. He kind of just disappeared. But Colonel Michael Aquino, we have evidence that he was involved in a large reaching child sex ring. Personally, and this is where you're really going to disagree with me, if I was to say anything about the 90s and the satanic panic, I would say, if anything, it was rightly intentioned but wrong focused. I don't think D&D was causing people to believe in Satan. But do I believe that preschool where the children were interrogated and they said that all the teachers were abusing them, then it was then written off by the courts? I think that was probably legitimate. I think we should tend to trust the children when they're talking about cases of child abuse. And so, to say, I don't think this is just a Catholic problem or even a Christian problem or a public school problem. It is a societal problem. It is societal sickness within humanity, which once again, we can stem back to the fall of humanity from God's perfect vision. And that's, the explanation for sin in the world. And, to say it's just Catholic or anything else. I know you didn't say it was just Catholic or even say it's just Christian. We have it in every segment of society, all the way from the Satanist communities to the people who proclaim to be devout Catholics. The difference is, this is the difference. In the Catholic Church, well, not in the Catholic Church, but in Christian communities, these kind of actions are viewed by the Bible and other, religious authorities as morally reprehensible. And most sane congregants and churchgoers would absolutely be in favor of total expulsion and, maybe even the death penalty for these people. However, in the satanic community, in the Temple of Set, what did they do to Michael Aquino? They did absolutely nothing to him. And he is a child sex trafficker. This kind of thing was awarded in the satanic community and hidden in Christian communities where they know it's wrong. So that's what I would say about this whole thing is, across the you got another $10. I'm really a moneymaker for you.
So, I mean, I don't know anything about the history of that particular instance with the Satanic Temple or the Satanic Institute. I don't think that was the Satanic Temple.
No, it was the Temple of Set.
Okay.
But it was LaVey's daughter who helped found it.
Right. I get you. I feel like that's very different from the Satanists that exist now. But
maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. We don't know their connections.
Well, I mean, my only point with all of that is because you talked about justice. Like the only way to get justice is through Christianity, because God, punishes people after they die. But it seems to me like a lot of Christian theology, most namely like evangelical Christians and whatnot, they say that all you got to do is believe in Jesus in order to get into heaven, and that kind of washes away any kind of justice that you could hope to get. So,
allow me to lead you. This will be a very short aside. You don't even have to respond to it if you find it too ridiculous. But what I will tell you is that American Christianity has been very negatively influenced by the institution of capitalism. American capitalism has influenced Christianity to such an extent that it is a major concern for me. It is something that I think about every day, is that the religion of consumerism, by and large, has consumed many elements of the Christian church. Jesus himself, which I don't know if you acknowledge that Jesus was a real historical person, but even Bart Ehrman does, but Jesus was a real historical person. And, regardless of whether you believe in God, I don't think you believe in God, given your name, but we have Jesus teaching here being for the poor, being for the downtrodden, being for the mourning, being for the poor in spirit. And you have him overthrowing the money changers in the temple, saying they were making a mockery. You have Judaism. Michael Aquino referred to himself as a Satanist. Okay, I'm sorry. But that was just a comment that flashed up out there. But you have Christianity in many ways being subservient, and some evangelical denominations are really susceptible to this, to the god of capitalism, actually a demon, Mammon, more than they are to Christ himself. What does the Bible say? The Bible says it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for the rich man to enter the kingdom of God. But you have, down the generations, had Christianity so perverted by these capitalist thinkers that we no longer, in many cases, have this pure Christianity of Christ. We have people talking about, money. That is not a Christian thought, in my opinion. So I think that many Christian dogmas have been watered down. I think you would agree that there are bad atheists, and I can agree that there are bad Christians. But what I would disagree on is that the following of right teaching and right gospel. That's what we would disagree on.
Okay.
I said you didn't have to respond. That's ridiculous.
Right.
Capitalism, not good for Christianity.
I mean, I can agree that unfettered capitalism in any kind of respect is bad. But in any case, one thing that I want to touch on, and then we can go, because it has been about an hour, almost an hour and a half.
Sure.
So one thing that I have a problem with is this whole idea of God being the moral lawgiver.
Okay. God being the moral lawgiver.
Right. And so, because I see a lot of things that you would call immoral being done by God, and it kind of seems like religious people just give God a pass.
Now you're mostly going to be talking about the Old Testament, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's the Old Testament. There's some stuff in the New Testament.
What would you say in the New Testament? Like, for argument's sake, let's say I'm a Gnostic. Let's say I'm a Gnostic, for argument's sake. I'm not a Gnostic, but let's say for argument's sake that I'm a Gnostic Christian. And so I throw out the Old Testament. What would your explanation be to a Gnostic? Yes, this is what some Gnostics believe. Not all Gnostics. I'm sure someone in the comments is going to correct me that this sect of Gnosticism doesn't believe that. But there are sects of Gnosticism who just completely throw out the Old Testament. How would you argue with somebody who is a Gnostic believer in God, saying that God's the moral lawgiver, here's the New Testament, nothing else?
Well, I mean, first off, I would disagree about throwing out the Old Testament. Jesus says in the New Testament that, that God, which was him, is the same in the past as he is right now in the present and in the future. So the Jesus, or the God of the New Testament, is the same Jesus, or is the same God of the Old Testament. So any of the atrocities done in the Old Testament by the same God of the New Testament is definitely of warrant to mention. Just because God sort of chilled his ass out in the New Testament doesn't detract from the atrocities that he commits in the Old Testament. But as far as like in the New Testament, what I might suggest is, the parts where Jesus, shits on that woman.
You're referring to yeah. Well, he doesn't call her a dog. There's a lot of theological exegesis, not exegesis about that particular part in the Bible. And the fact of the matter is that Jesus wanted a proclamation of faith from that woman. And he awarded her, by the way, in the end, he awarded her everything she wanted. He didn't say, no, you're a dog. Now, and now I'm not going to do anything for you. Jesus is just as harsh with the Hebrews as he was with the woman. I think was that in Tyre, but he was just as harsh with that woman as he was with Jews. When it was Jews who are coming to him and saying, save my daughter. And he's like, you have no faith. I'm not going to help you. He says that to the Jews. There is no sort of mutual, there's no sort of exclusive treatment where Jesus treats the Jews so much better than he's treating these outsiders. He wants proclamations of faith so that he knows that they believe, and so that through their belief he can perform these miracles. So he treats that woman poorly, yeah, but look at the way, he talks about the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. He talks about that. He tells the rich young ruler, who is by some traditional sources, a Sadducee, not a Pharisee, a Sadducee. And he tells him, give up everything you own, give all your money to the poor. Why don't you do all that? And then you can truly believe in me. So Jesus has a very constant treatment of pick up your torch and follow me. Be good, give to the poor, live humbly, and follow me. His proclamation to that woman is the same as it is to the rich young ruler, which is...
He also said, follow the laws of Moses, did he not?
Yeah, he said that, there's this whole thing about the laws that he has not overturned or he fulfilled. Now, there's a whole argument between the moral law and I forget what it's called, but there's some sort of moral law and traditional law, and there's this whole thing about that to distinguish the Jews as the messianic people. And this is very prominent in rabbinical studies and halakhic rulings. We also have to remember that the Jewish texts of the Old Testament, Christians often have a hard time defending the Old Testament because by and large, Christians don't use the Mishnahs or the commentaries by the rabbis on the actual implementation of the law. So if we look at the implementation of the laws of the Old Testament by halakhic courts, the implementation of the law is you also have to set standards for when the law can be enforced. The Old Testament is a lot of times mute on when the laws can be enforced. Like the adultery put adulterers to death thing, right? You're familiar with that? The way that very faithful first century Jews in halakhic courts put that into practice is you needed this standard of evidence, you needed this proof, you needed witnesses, you needed to submit all this stuff. And a halakhic court that submitted one death penalty every 7 years was considered bloody by the standards of first century Judea. So you have this thing called standards of proof, and it's because these are God's pure laws. The Torah is God's pure laws. If we are to enforce God's pure laws, we can't just strain them through the one-layered strainer of human judgment, because human judgment is inherently fallible. You have to strain it through all these procedures and judgments and second judgments, because we need to make sure that the implementation of God's law is right, because God makes some pretty bad pronunciations for people who immorally or loosely enforce the law. And so you had a very high standard of law enforcement by first century Jews.